personally, I'm happy to accept this, the Marxist account of alienation and the distinction between the two levels. I think that's really indispensable. And really, I think, the attempt to give a positive valence to the notion of alienation in the context of the debates we've had about freedom and improvisation, etc. What it's really targeting is, I guess, arguably a kind of a pre-Marxian or romantic notion of alienation. So in other words, it wouldn't be the Marxian notion of alienation at all. It would be perhaps a vulgar misinterpretation of what Marx calls alienation in terms of this, the idea that there is some kind of subjective kernel of humanity, which is then, which needs to be recovered, and reappropriated. So in a way, it's really, what I think is interesting, so in a way I'm perfectly happy, as I said, to try to, or actually I think, the positive conception of alienation that we've tried to articulate can be rendered compatible with Marxian account once alienation is distinguished from the whole dialectics of appropriation and expropriation. Is that the overcoming of alienation is not about recovering the restitution of the proper or the restitution of propriety. I clearly think that the technical sense of alienation in Marx has nothing to do with this, or has little or nothing to do with this this metaphysical notion of propriety. So although I haven't done it, I'm personally very interested in trying to to reconcile the two, in a way, the claim that estrangement can be given a positive content, that estrangement is constitutive of what it means to be, or of what is characteristic or distinctive of the human in some non-essential sense. The idea that this necessary estrangement still requires overcoming or dissolving the kinds of, the mystificatory alienation that is operative in the commodity form, etc.
So another, maybe just to connect to the kind of some of the claims that the Xenofeminist Manifesto makes, which is a kind of recovering of the notion of universalism. And I wonder, is there any way, do they go hand in hand, that maybe our capacity to understand our own estrangement and alienated condition could be as a way to think some form of universalism through our rational capacity? On the other hand, there is a lot of criticisms around universalism because of kind of Eurocentric perspective, or like the totalizing qualities. So if I know that you've been concerned with this issue, so if you could touch upon this.
So you're asking about the link between this the attempt to think or to understand alienation as a positive enabling condition, and the link with universalism. That's already there, I guess, even in Marx, with the sense that unlike other creatures, humans have precisely because of their social being, have the capacity to remake themselves. In other words, they are not defined by any kind of natural or pre-given ontological determination, so that this is just to affirm that there's a kind of
right. There is something. I'm sorry about this technical failure. We hope to fix it as soon as possible. Just give us a second. I'm very sorry, and we hope to really fix it as soon as possible. If you can bear with us, it would be great. It will be just a second. Please accept my apologies for this. It's certainly not our intention. It's a technical problem that we hope to solve very soon. No, maybe she's okay. Okay. Hello, Ray. Yeah, there was this.
I apologize. It was probably the connection at my end, actually.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so you were talking about the capacity for the social capacity for humans, in difference to other animals. That through, I guess,
yes, and I guess because simply the thought would be that there's what it means to be human isn't already given or isn't determined in advance, and precisely because of the intrinsically social character of human existence, and because history, the historicity of social existence entails that there's going to be that the precise nature, the kinds of determinations that enter into being human are going to be undergo constant transformation through time. And this is tied to the notion of universalism, I guess. That's because other creatures are characterized by an essence which is a specific difference. In other words, they have a specific kind of being, which is whose difference other beings can be specified in advance. The difference, the ways in which humans differ from other creatures is not specific. It's not a specific difference. It's another kind of difference, as some philosophers have put it. And that's tied to universalism. That's tied to some kind of notion either of the generic or the universal. I mean, but you use the term generic, which in a way makes a lot of sense, and which is perhaps more useful than the term universal, if the term, because people can always claim that anything that lays claim to universality is always actually a particularity or a specificity that's masquerading as something universal. But I still think that the term, the genericity of the universal is something that ought to be affirmed and that ought to be maintained as a viable concept, despite the obvious, the illegitimate proclamations or appropriations of the universal by, whether it's by Europeans or males or any other kind of specific being that lays claim to universality, which is obviously illegitimate and wrong. But in a way, the denunciation itself, okay, when you denounce the imperialistic universalism of European culture, you're doing it from a vantage point already recognizes this as a particularity. And in a way, this is a point that Hegel made a long time ago, is that because the notion of the particular, because the concepts of universal and particular are bound up together, to denounce the specificity or the particularity of a culture or a way of life or a way of thinking is always to presuppose some notion of universality that has not yet been given has not yet been given positive content. So in other words, a very denunciation of Eurocentrism as colonialism or imperialism or whatever is a kind of universalism. It's a kind of disavowed universalism. Because otherwise, you wouldn't even be able to denounce this this presumptive or imperialistic universalism as illegitimate, as a kind of as a power grab by some particularity, as an illegitimate power grab by a particular set of vested interests. So,
okay, so and then maybe I just ask the last question, and then I open it for other people in the room. So how? It's a question that I've been trying to ask I've been asking you for a number of years, and is how do you conceive the notion of the subject or subjectivity? How, if we come from this generic type of understanding, then how it can subjectified? How can we produce a subject out of this generic understanding of the human? Because, so for Marx, the concept of the subject is capital, in the sense that is what it moves us, and we become the object in the way that we objectified our label within that. But then how do we basically become a subject?
well, in a way, I guess in a classical Marxian framework, it would be this is what this alienation is about, or the overcoming of alienation. It's about disobjectification, about not misrecognizing yourself as an object, but recovering your agency and your power, constitutive subjectivity as an agent, as a self-determining agent. I guess this is what or at least the potential for that recovery is associated with the proletariat in the classical conception. So now, obviously, if capital is this self-moving, is the only veritable subject left, this self-moving power, this autonomous, self-regulating agency, the problem then would be, well, how do you, what rival agency could be discovered to challenge it? But of course, I don't think that capital is a subject, and clearly that is. That's the kind of the lure of capital is to the mystification is precisely the process through which you are led to attribute agency and self-determination to what is nothing but an extremely complicated objective mechanism. And it's a mechanism that depends upon human practical activities and human attitudes and beliefs. So in a way, I think I'm even, a traditional Marxist on this point. And I think that the agency of capital is entirely, constituted by estranged or alienated human self-relation. I think that's all that capital is. And I think it's possible to describe and explain, the mechanisms through which this, this estrangement and this mystification are produced. And really, I think that, obviously there's a lot to say about subjectivity, but I think that subjectivity is a kind of self-relation. It's a kind of self-relation which in a way is very difficult to situate in the objective domain. So in a way, I think philosophers like people like, this is something obviously that people like Zizek have emphasized, but I think the way in which this self-relation is characterized is, can change the way in which you understand how it can be realized. So in a way, this is why I think that it's how we think, how we conceive of ourselves and our objective circumstances, makes a decisive difference to our practical capacities, to what it is we can actually do. And I think understanding, in a way, a proper diagnosis of the mystification that leads us to misrecognize our own self-relation and take it to be the self-relation of an object is, the first step, the indispensable preliminary towards the recovery or the reassertion of this subjective agency. So, what does this? Two things. One is that I think that subjectivity involves some kind of, some kind of interpersonal or trans-individual relation. In other words, in order for a subject to be instantiated, there has to be, there has to be a relationship between the I and the we. Okay, so there has to be some relationship between the individual and the collective. I think, Hegel has, this is a kind of standard kind of Hegelian point. But then the issue is one about how we understand the conditions under which this the interpenetration of the individual and the collective is realized. And my own conviction is that it involves cognition, is that you have to be able to understand and to know certain things about yourself and your relationship to your fellow beings and to your objective socioeconomic circumstances in order to be capable of acting as an agent or being an agent. So again, all this to say that agency is not simply a given fact or some kind of natural phenomenon. Agency, in a way, has to be constructed. It's a synthetic artifice, and it involves both cognitive and practical capacities. So, in other words, I think lots of philosophers give you parts of the or components of a theory of agency, but I don't think that there is, definitive or satisfactory theory of subjective agency currently available. So I think it's something that needs to be constructed, it needs to be developed. But it can only be developed, one, if you recognize, if one acknowledges the different dimensions that have to come into play in order for something like subjectivity to be achieved. Because it's something that has to be achieved. It's something, it's not, we're not already subjects.
Okay, so somebody might have a question that wants to ask to Ray. Inigo, and so there's several people. Maybe because Inigo already talked 2 days ago, we go for somebody else. Please come, do a queue or something, come here.
Hi there. Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. In your recent essay entitled That Which Is Not, you claim that there's a fundamental link between thought and negativity. And you say that this connection is based on the essential normativity of rational thought. I was just wondering if you could expand on what you claim is the essential negativity of conceptual thought.
Okay. Yeah, that essay, it's not so recent, but I think some things, I've clarified certain things which I think I was confused about in that essay. And one is that the link, the linkage between normativity and negativity. Norms are tied to rules, okay? But rules have a very peculiar ontological status, which is to say that rules are not things that exist, that positively exist in any ordinary sense in which things can be said to positively exist. So in a way, this whole the normative or rule-governed dimension of rationality is something that cannot be positively characterized in an object-bound ontology. In other words, if your conception of what it means for something to be is to be an object or a substance, or what Heidegger calls something that is present at hand, then it's difficult, if not impossible, to conceive of the being of something like a norm or a rule. But obviously, the most interesting, of 20th century European philosophy has been this kind of this critique of the identification of being with substance on the one hand, but also of being with presence, or being with actuality. And in this sense, this means that there's more to being than what is ever actual, or whatever is objectively, well, any kind of given time. So that we have to think, we have to enlarge our conceptual capacities to understand the ways in which things can be said to, and in this regard, so I think that the rules, in a way, that are constitutive of rationality, are tied to processes, to processes that unfold in space and time, and that's in a way that one part of the answer to the question is to say that the link between rationality and negativity is that rationality can't be understood in terms of is objectively present, or any positive characteristic or empirically recognizable characteristic of creatures such as Homo sapiens. But the other side of negativity, or the other kind of facet of the negative, is this, in a way, this positive sense of negation is that which supersedes or dissolves positive characterization. So if rationality involves a kind of self-relation, it means that our ability to, what makes us rational is our ability to understand ourselves both, in our difference from, the subject recognizes its difference from the object, but it also understands its difference, it's different from itself. The fact that it cannot, it misrecognizes itself if it tries to give, a positive characterization of its own essence or nature. Which is why I think rationality is tied to time and to something. Rationality is not something that is, it's not a norm or a standard that is actualized at any given historical moment. It's something that unfolds or unravels through time, and it needs time to be realized. And I think, and this is what I take Hegel to have been saying, and this is why I think Hegel actually already, that Hegel's kind of account of the link between rationality and, the labor of the negative, is absolutely kind of crucial. So that's something I'm very interested in kind of reinvestigating from this kind of account of this account of the nature of rationality, which understands concepts as rules, and there's more. There's lots of things to be said here, because I know that this conception has been this kind of let's say this kind of post-Celarzian or Brandonian conception of rationality as something that is rule governed has also been criticized by certain Hegelians who think that it's a kind of it's unnecessarily inflationary account of what Hegel means by spirit, and that's something I'm interested in. That's something I'm kind of working on right now. But I think that I think that for instance, Brandon's account of Hegel is unsatisfactory in certain regards, and that there are things that in a way that he leaves out of his account. But I think the danger of simply rejecting that account out of hand is simply retreating to an Aristotelian Hegel, to a conception, an interpretation of Hegel which is simply a kind of Aristotle after Kant, and which ultimately means a kind of a theologized conception of rationality as part of the order of nature. And I wanted to say that reason is unnatural and reason can't be naturalized because of the interdependence between conceptual resources and what it means for something to be natural, which where both terms of the relationship are constantly undergoing transformation.
Okay, somebody else has a question? Or if not, Inigo, somebody else? Okay, so yeah, let's come here, and maybe this is the last one, and then we go.
Okay, hey. So you were saying that, not to rephrase what you were saying, but that the process from I to we is a cognitive process. So I'm wondering, in kind of discourse around communization and self-abolition, which in some sense entails xenofeminist projects, how you see that transition being made from a we that recognizes an I within the we to a we that's more self-abolitionary, if you can say that. Does that make sense?
A we that is more self-abolitionist?
Self-abolitionist? I don't know, where the I doesn't make sense in terms of the we.
Okay, I mean, I'll try to answer. I mean, look, in a way, I mean, I think this, for Hegel, there's a thing to be made between the I and the self, okay? And this is, I think, Lacan makes this distinction, and I think, it's a distinction that is, arguably also prefigured in Hegel. And the point is that it's the self that is the problem. The self is always a kind of, a fictitious identification. The self is always, the I misrecognizes itself as a self that has a set of autobiographical and, kind of biological determinations of characteristics. So I think it's the self that's a problem here. The I understood as the point, the point of enunciation, or the point from which an assertion unfolds, I think is transitive with the we, insofar as you understand that already in German, German idealism, in Kant and Hegel, there's an impersonality of the I. Okay, it's the, as Kant says, it's the I, the he or she, or it, the thing that thinks. Okay, and the thing that thinks is this anonymous, impersonal function that is collectively instantiated. Okay, so the I as the thinking, as the point of subjectivation, or the point where thinking unfolds, is in a way can be instantiated in a community. So that anyone can say I, and any any member of that collectivity can identify, or rather can recognize its equivalence with every other. So the point is, to get in order to have this equivalence between the impersonality of the I and the collectivity of the we. Okay, so to be able to fuse together impersonality and sociality. And that means that what needs to be abolished is the self as the, the kind of, whatever, the ideological, whatever kind of ideological misrecognition prevents you from achieving, the transition from I to we and back again. Because then the self involves some kind of an identification in terms of culture, in terms of language, in terms of biology or psychology or whatever you want. I think that that's the term that needs to be liquidated. So I don't think so. As I understand it, this kind of problematic of self-abolition, I think it is a self that has to be abolished. But the abolition of the self should facilitate the fusion.
Ray, we cannot hear you. We cannot hear you. You have self disappeared. I don't know if it was in purpose or not, but maybe it was self-alienated, which is coming together and we become we now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Okay. So yeah, you were at the peak, and maybe we thought it was a performative gesture on your side to self-abolish yourself, or...
No, so where did it cut out? Or what point did it cut out?
Anybody?
Fusion.
Fusion. On fusion.
Yes, I mean, so the problematic of self-abolition, as I understand it, means yes, it is the self that has to be abolished, but the self has to be abolished as what prevents, in a way, the transitivity between the I and the we, or the fusion of the I and the we. That's how I would kind of understand this, the problem of self-abolition.
Okay, so I guess we have to go on with the night, unless somebody has like a really special need for asking a question. Otherwise, we go on. Okay, there is somebody who wants to ask a question in desperate need to go ahead. Yeah, please go ahead.
Alright, so as you gather, we're pressed for time, so you might want to just be brief. But so I'm wondering how we are to make sense of the prophets that have appeared, warning us over the rise of artificial intelligence. Is this in fact a coded warning over humans? Because as far as I can see, the rise of artificial general intelligence is something to be welcomed.
Okay. So you're asking me what I think about these warnings, or how I think what the proper response to them is?
How we're to make sense of that in relation to questions of intelligence and inhumanism? Because they would seem to be warning us against this, whereas in fact this project, your project, would be saying the opposite.
Okay. Well, let me try and answer. I think, clearly, I think, warnings, being frightened of something is, a very poor position to be in. And so that these, I don't think artificial intelligence is anything to be frightened of. But these, the kind of, these warnings, these kind of apocalyptic prognosis about the dangers it presents. I mean, I think that they're symptomatic of the fact that we can't. What's missing is an understanding of what, I guess, of the link between intelligence and sociality, or the link between cognitive capacities and social systems. Now, it looks like, human cognitive capacities or human intelligence is tied to reality. And there's lots of, plausible empirical kind of evidence to suggest that the ramping up of our cognitive capacities was tied to certain, social transformations. But obviously, the artificial intelligence, general artificial intelligence, that's a kind of a characterization of intelligence whose link to sociality is not evident, or it seems that it doesn't seem to be necessarily tied to, or at least as far as I know, it's not tied to any account of the link between. There's nothing inherently social about it. It doesn't seem to depend upon any kind of social structure or social system. So, two things. That although I think that, the distinction between what is called intelligence is a kind of generalized problem-solving capacity on the one hand, and what philosophers call sapience, which is rationality, has to be clarified, and I think it has to be clarified so as to understand the conditions under which artificial intelligence would not be threat, but would be, the development of this intelligence would be something that would be tied to our own self-transformation. So in other words, it's because really the development of artificial intelligence is unfolding in conditions of, to go back to of alienation, of conditions where we don't quite understand what intelligence is for, what intelligence can do, and how intelligence can could transform our own possibilities of existence. That intelligence is understood. This artificial intelligence is understood as a threat to human, to human existence, and which I think is a symptom of a very kind of a lamentable state of affairs, basically. So I think once the link between intelligence and social sapience is clarified, then kind of machine intelligence would be, the development of machine intelligence would be fully congruent to the developments of collective cognitive capacity or collective social intelligence. So yes, I think research, the development of artificial intelligence is to be affirmed, but it can't simply be the conditions under which it's being developed are tied to a set of very peculiar and kind of frankly pathological social circumstances, and that's why it's perceived as either as something exciting if one is a kind of an apocalyptic exposition, or as something that's terribly threatening for standard humanism. So I think that is just once again that's a false dichotomy. So it's something that should be seen to be a false dichotomy. There's nothing about the human that is inherently, refractory to intelligence, or vice versa. And I think that the perception that there is, it's either intelligence or humanity. I think that's a terrible indictment of our current kind of, Islamic limitations.
Okay, on that note, thanks so much for being with us. And fortunately, we have to keep going with this evening, which hopefully will be something special. Yeah, thanks so much, Ray. Really appreciate it.
Look, I'm sorry about the hitches, sorry about the cutouts. But anyway, thanks again, and
Yeah,
have a good night.
we speak very soon.
Okay, cheers. Okay,
Take
good
care.
night.
Good night.
Good night.